a great many ways we can use our leisure time. We can, for example, access the internet, watch television, exercise, read, pray, meditate, go shopping, and of course many other ways in which we can use our leisure time. Well, what have the great thinkers claimed is the best way we can use our limited time on earth? Well, there is pretty much a consensus among the great thinkers that the best thing we can do is to seek wisdom and to try to live wisely. This is the second in a series of programs I'm doing on wisdom and what famous thinkers in philosophy, psychology, literature, and religion have said about it. Among the important questions I've addressed and will be addressing in this series are the following. What is wisdom? What might be the characteristics of a wise person? What might be a wise person's attitude towards the following? Money, other people, joy. Where might a wise person, for example, look for joy? Fears. How might a wise person deal with fears? We all have fears. Being popular. Do you think a wise person would seek to be a popular person? And also, how does a wise person deal with the idea that he or she is going to die? And finally, another question I'll be dealing with in this series is how does one acquire wisdom? First, a brief review of some of the points I made in my previous program. First of all, I defined wisdom. Wisdom is generally defined as good sense, good judgment, understanding of what is true and what is false. Aristotle described wisdom in this way. He said it's knowledge of the highest things. Thoreau said that wisdom is knowledge of the highest art, the art of living. A philosopher, of course, is a seeker of wisdom, and philosophy involves the pursuit of wisdom. Socrates believed the most important question anyone can ask himself or herself is, how shall I live? What might be the characteristics of a wise person? In my last program, I dealt with this question at length, so now I'm just going to briefly review some of the main points I made. Again, the question, what might be the characteristics of a wise person? I think it's fair to say a wise person avoids avoidable unhappiness. The Buddha said, much of your pain is self-chosen. An example of this, I think, might be the idea that many people suffer low self-esteem because they allow the media, the movie industry, for example, television, music, to set the standards as to how they should judge themselves. And perhaps if they used other standards, they wouldn't have low self-esteem. And perhaps those alternate standards might be better standards, more mature standards, wiser standards. A wise person, it has been said, is also a skeptical person. A wise person has doubts about groupthink, about how the majority thinks. The wise person believes that just as few people are good athletes, few people are clear thinkers. A wise person is also an inquisitive person. Socrates put it this way, the unexamined life is not worth living. The unexamined life is not worth living. And also, a wise person deals pretty well with disappointments, fears, frustrations, anger, lust. And a wise person has self-discipline. Self-discipline, for example, when it comes to eating, drinking, sex, and buying. Indeed, Aristotle's motto, if we could attach a motto to him, was nothing in excess. In other words, the wise person lives in such a way that he's living temperately, moderately. A wise person also uses his or her time well. The great thinkers claim that very few people use their leisure time wisely, intelligently. And what might be the best way to use our time on this earth? Well, so many of the famous thinkers, in one way or another, have talked about, on a daily basis, exercising our minds, bodies, and hearts. Again, the wise person on a daily basis has an interest in exercising his mind, perhaps by reading something significant, by exercising his body, could simply be walking, or I should say and also in exercising his heart. And by exercising one's heart, what the famous thinkers mean is showing people affection, being a kind person, that's an important thing we can do in our limited time on this earth. Also, wise people, since they use their time wisely, are very discriminating TV viewers and internet users. A wise person also has a pretty good knowledge of reality, of the way things really are. In other words, the wise person has a pretty good idea of what is true and false about human nature and about life in general. The famous German philosopher Schopenhauer said that we all have blind spots, and as we grow older, if we are maturing, we'll reduce the number of blind spots we have in terms of our view of other people and of life. Santayana, who taught at Columbia University and is a rather famous 20th century philosopher, said this. He said, "Wisdom comes by disillusionment. Wisdom comes by disillusionment." The idea is that we gain wisdom by freeing ourselves from false ideas. How often we've heard people say, "If I only knew at 20 what I know now." Wise people also try hard to be just people, moral people. The great philosophers are in agreement that wisdom can never be divorced from morality. Confucius, Plato, Jesus, Buddha, Spinoza, Kant, all believed that wisdom can never be divorced from morality. Indeed, Kant and Emerson believed we have a deep inner psychological need to be good people, regardless of whether there is a God or a heaven. Buddha and Socrates both claim the path to wisdom is not so much esoteric knowledge as it is a moral spiritual project. Seneca, very famous philosopher of antiquity, said that what wisdom involves primarily is self-transformation. It's not so much the acquisition of knowledge, although that's important, but rather improving one's character. A wise person also is a flexible person. Psychiatrist M. Scott Peck has put it this way: extraordinary flexibility is required for successful living in all spheres of activity. We know that the only constant in life is change. We ourselves are changing all the time, and people and things around us are changing, which again necessitates that we be able to be flexible. And what are some of the examples of these changes that we undergo? Well, we are all aging. Sometimes we experience illness. That can require flexibility to deal with it. The death of a loved one, if a job or business doesn't work out. Again, that's going to require a certain kind of flexibility in our thinking and our behavior. What do wise people want to know? Well, wise people want perspective. They want to see the forest and not just the trees. Wise people want to know the unchangeable, the enduring, in contrast to the transient. Wise people want to know what's really important in life and what's unimportant. Wise people want to learn not to sweat the small stuff. Wise people want to know and keep in mind the fundamental facts of our existence. And what are some of the fundamental facts of our existence? Well, obviously, fact number one is we're all going to die. Buddha, Jesus, and Freud all believed it's a good idea to think about death on a regular basis. I'll say that again. Buddha, Jesus, Freud, and countless other famous thinkers believed it was a good idea for us to think about death on a regular basis. Why so? Well, it's a reminder that we have only a limited time on this earth to live, to love, and to experience. The Dalai Lama has put it this way: meditation on death cuts off attraction towards meaningless and transient activities. Again, meditation on death cuts off attraction towards meaningless and transient activities. It's a reminder that whether I worry or don't worry, I'm going to die. The Dalai Lama has also said this. He said that if we think about death regularly, we won't be so anxious when our time comes to die. It is interesting that religious thinkers and atheists like Freud have claimed we should make it a habit to think about death. Another fundamental fact of our existence, besides the obvious one that we're going to die, is that life is often difficult. We all experience anxiety and nervousness. We are exposed to accidents, illness, job-related problems, relationship-related problems. Seneca put it this way. He said, "Life is no soft affair." Among the important causes of unhappiness can be, and in fact is, unkind, vicious people. Bertrand Russell said that, unfortunately, a great number of people on this planet are happiness stealers. Freud put it this way. Freud said there are three main causes of unhappiness in life. And one of the main causes of unhappiness in life, according to Freud, is other people. Jean Paul Sartre, very famous 20th century philosopher, said this: hell is other people. This is a reminder of the importance of right association. The Buddhists talk about right association. What does that mean? Well, it means that when possible, we should get toxic people out of our lives. And when that's not possible, to at least limit our contact with toxic people. And also, it's so important, when possible, to bring affectionate, warm-hearted people into our lives. Again, to bring, when possible, warm-hearted, affectionate people into our lives. This is a reminder, by the way, of a fundamental fact, which is that other people can be a source of happiness, but also other people can be a source of unhappiness. It's also a reminder about the importance of self-reliance. Wise people tend to be self-reliant people. And what does that mean? Well, self-reliance involves cultivating the ability to enjoy one's own company. It also involves an ability to cultivate enjoying silence. We can often do our best thinking only in silence, and it's so important that we cultivate the ability to enjoy silence. It's important, therefore, to take time each day to be alone. Another fundamental fact of our existence is that life almost never works the way we want it to. The Tao Te Ching, very famous Chinese book of wisdom, provides this advice: don't try to force life to work in a way in which it won't. That will result in endless frustration. The idea is we have to learn to go with the flow. Reinhold Niebuhr, very famous 20th century theologian, composed the Serenity Prayer, which is my favorite prayer, and I believe provides invaluable wisdom. Allow me to briefly recite it. My guess is that many of you are familiar with it. Again, the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept what I cannot change, and the courage to change what I can change, and the wisdom to know what can be changed and what can't be changed. Another fundamental fact of our existence is that we will be criticized by other people no matter what we do, even when we do good deeds. Allow me some examples. It is interesting that all of our greatest presidents, while serving as president, were subjected to vitriolic criticism. I'm talking, for example, about George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin D. Roosevelt. Let me give you some examples. When George Washington was president, during his second term, which marked the formation of political parties in a rather unofficial way, Washington's political opponents accused him of being senile. They even went further than that. Some of Washington's opponents claimed that he had an illegitimate child. And who was the illegitimate child? Alexander Hamilton, his Secretary of the Treasury, who had also served as an aide-de-camp during the Revolutionary War. This story, by the way, was completely false, but that didn't matter to Washington's opponents, so that many of the newspapers that opposed Washington's policies printed this story and circulated this rumor that he had an illegitimate child. Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, was exposed to even more vitriolic criticism than Washington. It was claimed that Jefferson was an atheist, and many of the newspapers of the time who opposed his policies circulated this idea, publicized this idea that he was an atheist, when indeed Jefferson could probably be more accurately described as a deist and not an atheist. It was also claimed that Jefferson had a black concubine. Jefferson, of course, was a Southerner. He owned more than 100 slaves. And some of the newspapers, while Jefferson was president, claimed that Jefferson had a sexual relationship with one of his slaves, a young woman named Sally Hemings. We now know, by the way, that this allegation perhaps was true. Recent evidence, recent research, including some DNA evidence, indicates the probability is that Jefferson's opponents were right on this count. He probably did have a long-lasting affair with one of his female slaves. Abraham Lincoln was also subjected to very serious, severe, very often unfair criticism. Lincoln, as you perhaps know, received only 40% of the popular votes the first time he was elected president. And how was he elected president, since less than half the people voted for him? Well, he did get a majority of the electoral votes. So many of Lincoln's opponents claimed that he was a troublemaker, that his stance on slavery, a stance whereby he claimed he didn't want slavery to be expanded, he wanted slavery contained where it already was. Some of his opponents claimed he was a traitor not only to the people of the United States, but to the Constitution of the United States, that it was implicit in the Constitution of the United States that slavery would be allowed to expand. Lincoln was also criticized for the way he looked. Some of the newspapers that opposed him claimed that he was an ugly man and often printed stories about how unattractive physically Lincoln was, and sometimes drew cartoons, even comparing Lincoln to non-human animals. Franklin D. Roosevelt, one of the most famous presidents and perhaps one of the best presidents we ever had, also was subjected to much unfair criticism. It was claimed that he was a traitor to his class. Roosevelt was a rich man, and while president, he believed we needed higher taxes, and that since we were in the midst of the Depression, it was the rich who could pay these taxes, so that Roosevelt urged Congress to provide for serious tax increases for the rich, and this made Roosevelt an enemy of many rich people in America. FDR was also accused of being a socialist. Indeed, some people said he was a communist. The fact of the matter is that Roosevelt did believe that to deal with the Depression, we needed an expanded government. We needed big government. So that Roosevelt proposed such policies as Social Security, the legalization of labor unions, a minimum wage, as well as higher taxes. And of course, all of these things were eventually put into laws. Again, Social Security, legalization of labor unions, the minimum wage, and higher taxes. Thomas Jefferson said something about the office of presidency, I think that provides some illumination. Jefferson, who was our third president, claimed that it was likely that in the past and in the future, no president would leave the presidency with as high a reputation, with as good a reputation as he began his presidency. It's interesting, by the way, that today, if a president has a 60% approval rating, that's considered very good. Why is it, by the way, that everyone, whether it be the President of the United States or ourselves, will be criticized, sometimes unfairly, in life? Well, the reason we will all be criticized is that some people are vicious, some people are envious, some people are extremely ignorant. The fact of the matter is, however, that even good people will sometimes criticize us. How so? Why is it that sometimes even good people, virtuous people, will criticize us? Well, because no two minds ever work alike. Ask any husband and wife about that. The Tao Te Ching, very famous Chinese book of wisdom, which I've alluded to many times in my programs over the last couple of years, says this: seek the approval of others, and you will be their prisoner. Confucius was asked one day about a man whom everybody liked. And Confucius was asked, what do you think about that? Someone who's liked by everybody. And Confucius said, that's not sufficient. And Confucius' disciples said, well, I know of somebody else whom nobody likes. And he asked Confucius, he said, Master, what do you think about that? And Confucius said, that's not sufficient. Confucius' disciple was somewhat confused. It's not sufficient to be liked by everybody. It's not sufficient to be disliked by everybody. Well, what's the wise person's attitude? Well, Confucius provided an explanation. Confucius said, it would be good to be liked by good people and disliked by bad people. It's also been said that a person without enemies is a person without principles. Socrates, Jesus, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. all had enemies. Thus far in this program, I've been talking about what I call, and what other thinkers call, some of the fundamental facts of our existence. What I wish to do now is to switch gears and talk about what some people, including myself, refer to as some of the fundamental ideas about our existence. Again, going from fundamental facts to fundamental ideas. And why am I calling them ideas and not facts? Well, because they're more open to opinion. One of the fundamental ideas of our existence, I think, is this: when I deliberately treat another person unfairly, I will, in the long run, suffer for my unfair treatment of another person. Whereas, when I deliberately treat another person fairly and justly, I'm helping myself. I will be rewarded at the time or in the future for my right behavior. The Dalai Lama has put it this way: if you do good, you will have happiness. If you do bad, you yourself will suffer. The Dalai Lama, of course, is a Buddhist, and the Buddhists believe in the idea of karma. And what is karma? Karma is the idea of the law of consequences. The idea is, when we do good, we will be rewarded. When we do evil, we will be punished. The Christian take on karma is the idea of heaven and hell. In Judaism, we know that the prophets of the Old Testament claim that we have a duty to promote justice in this world. And one of the most famous of all Jewish sages, Hillel, put it this way. Hillel said, if I am not for me, who will be? But if I am for me only, what am I? Another fundamental idea, I think, of our existence is this: compassion for others is in our self-interest. Compassion for others is in our self-interest. Allow me to explain. So many of the famous thinkers, for example, Bertrand Russell and Arthur Schopenhauer, believed that since life involves so much suffering for everyone, we should regard other people as our fellow sufferers. Bob Dylan, famous musician and composer, put it this way. Bob Dylan said that when he was a young man, his aunt, who had herself suffered the amputation of a leg, gave him this advice. She said, "Bobby, be kind to all of the people you will ever meet, because everybody in this life is fighting a hard battle." Schopenhauer claimed that as we grow older, one of two characteristics will come to dominate our disposition, either compassion or envy. And Schopenhauer said, if envy comes to dominate our disposition, if we don't realize how much other people suffer and therefore envy other people, we will suffer from our envy. That it's impossible to be envious and happy at the same time. The Tao Te Ching puts it this way: heaven arms with compassion those whom she would not see destroyed. Heaven arms with compassion those whom she would not see destroyed. Another fundamental idea of our existence is the idea that increasing one's understanding is more important than increasing one's pleasure. Socrates put it this way: the many think pleasure to be the good. The smarter people think understanding to be the good. I see I'm running short on time now, so I'm going to have to bring this program to a close. Next week, my emphasis will be on a wise person's attitude towards money. And in a subsequent program, I'll be talking about what a wise person's attitude might be towards joy. In other words, where wise people look for joy. Finally, Henry David Thoreau reminds us that we are all artists. In Walden, he penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."